Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the operating cycles of all the different engines we're going to talk about. Now we can talk a little bit more about some of the specifics, different types of engines. Let's see here. Talked about the two-stroke, talked about the Wankel, the diesel. All right, the Gnome rotary engine. Well, now we're getting away from two-stroke, four-strokes, just different types of engines. So we can go all the way back to, I think this was pre-World War I, according to my notes. So the Gnome, also called a rotary engine. But you can see how it's not a rotary engine. It's a different type of rotary engine. During World War I, this type of engine, the crankshaft is mounted to the airplane while the crankcase and cylinders rotate with the prop. Oh, come on. You're not going to... Oh, there we go. Good. It looks like that, and that makes your head hurt. So the crankshaft stays still, but you can see as this cylinder right here moves around, it moves further away from that point right there. So it pulls the piston up, and then it comes around and pushes it forward. Some interesting and fun facts about the rotary engine. Other than the fact the crank is mounted to the airframe and the cylinders rotate. I guess a pro would be, as the cylinders rotate, they're air-cooled, so they're going to get a lot of air movement across them because the cylinders are moving quite rapidly. However, if you've ever played with anything that has any sort of gyroscopic effect, and you guys actually had Phil for helicopter, did you cover helicopters?
No.
Oh, you'll get it later, but too bad, because there's a thing called gyroscopic precession. Or a gyroscopic effect. This is like a giant gyroscope, so it made it really difficult to turn the plane. Another fun little fact with this is it has significant oiling problems, and they used castor oil, and it would spew castor oil out and hit the pilot, which is why pilots back then wore white scarves and goggles. The white scarf was to wipe the castor oil off of their face and goggles. Does anybody know what effect castor oil has on the human body? Hey, what's that?
A laxative.
It is a laxative, which is a very ladylike way of saying it's going to make the poo come out. So pilots who flew the Gnome rotary engines often had the diarrhea. Would say they had no problem going to poo. So let's see, crankshaft. This is probably where we don't need to write all these notes. Great cooling. It had oiling problems. Centrifugal force threw the oil out after its first trip through the engine. So flight time was literally more about how much oil you had than how much fuel you had. Oh, another fun little fact. It did not have, because you got to think about where do you put the carburetor. You can't have a carburetor running around in circles. So it pretty much, I believe, got a full shot of fuel. I mean, it's just wide open throttle fuel is what it got. And you had a thing called a coup switch, or coupe. It'd be spelled coupe for us, but because it's French, it'd be coup. And what that was is when you start it, it just instantly goes to wide open throttle. And you had a little switch that would kill the magneto. So to idle it, you would hold the switch down, the engine would kind of die off, and you'd let it go. So you just kind of hit the switch to monitor your throttle. So you're coming into land, you got to slow down, just kill the engine for a minute, let it go, kill the engine, let it go, kill the engine, let it go. And so, anyway, good times. Good times are had by all. Let's see.
Kings of
Let's see. Yeah, I do have that. Nope. That one actually sounds like it idles a little bit, but I think it's just because it's run down. Because otherwise you would never start a radial up and let it run like that. They turn so slow, so it's just idle. It's one course, so. Yeah, I believe I must have phone that. Nah, it's probably built in, but anyway.
These lasted before rebuilt.
All right. See, after that, let me see. We'll go back to the current slide. Let me see. Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. Really? I've got other stuff playing now? Oh.
Kevin's playlist.
Yeah. All right, we have the Curtiss OX-5, and I'll just read my note. Early American V8 liquid-cooled aircraft engine built by Curtiss, one of the first American-designed aircraft engines to enter mass production, although it was considered obsolete when it did so in 1917. You know what I don't have on here is like the Wright brothers' first engine, and the thing that's so remarkable about that to me was the carburetor, where it was some sort of little basket over the exhaust that had a calibrated leak, and it would drip fuel onto this little thing of hot rocks like some sort of spa, and that then the fumes would go up and then get ingested in the engine, and that's how it ran. I'm like, you went up in the air in that thing? So anyway, so that's a V8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. V8. You can see the valves out there out in the open. Here's the carburetor down there. All right, so we got the Curtiss OX-5. We talked about, let's see, inline engines. So this is the Ranger is the one I'm familiar with. I forget the other one offhand. Let me see. Single row of cylinders, 2 configurations. You had a crank on the bottom or crank on the top. So this has the crank on the top, and the reason why they put the crank on the top is because prop clearance. Want to get the prop way up there. So pros, it has less surface area drag because it's all inline. The inverted configuration had nice pilot view because the prop was way up here, so you didn't have to have longer cowlings. Let's see. Cons, difficult to cool the back cylinders. Oh my gosh, yes, these back cylinders. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 6. They get so hot. They're just not getting any fresh air around them. So the baffling is what you call the metal work around it, or the rubber that helps direct the air, is very critical on these things. It had poor power to weight ratio. In other words, for its particular weight, it did not produce a whole lot of power. You can take notes on this stuff if you want. I'm not going to circle back around. Then we get into the radial engines. They're still out there, and they are quite the workhorse. Let's see, here's 7-cylinder radial. We got, this is one of my more favorite, just because I worked on a lot of these. The Continental built this one. That was the Continental 220 horsepower, 670 cubic inch. They called it the W670, which was 220 horsepower. Kenner, I believe this one, 5-cylinder, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kenner built. I have a funny story about, I thought I killed somebody with one of these one time. I did a top overhaul on it, and I put it all back together, and it doesn't have a starter. So, it's time to start it. Run your work. So I get in the seat, and the boss, who was always ready and willing to give a hand propping, came along, and he was hand propping. He was wearing himself out, and I guess it was the owner. He came along and showed up, and he goes, "All right, guys, ready to run it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can't get it started." I tell you how to get it started. And he starts barking orders to me, put the throttle here, put the mags off, do that. And he pulled it through. Now put the throttle here. And he did something else. No, put the throttle here. Ready, set, contact. Wham! That thing just took off. And it's like, wow. But I couldn't see him anywhere. I mean, this engine just took off this ungodly RPM. And I'm like, shit, I can't turn it off. It'll kill me if I turn it off now. But I could not see this guy anywhere. And I'm watching everybody's faces, and nobody looked horrified. So I'm like, I guess I'm okay. And after a minute or so, he comes out from underneath the plane. Look good. Okay, I didn't kill you, thank God. I will never forget that day. Because I was like, I don't know what to do now. Do I shut it down? Do I keep going? Lycoming also built radial engines. Memory serves me, this is a 300 horsepower Lycoming R680, so 680 cubic inch, 300 horsepower. They made several versions. The 300 horsepower had the exhaust on the front. And I know that because this is a Stearman and that is a Stearman, and I worked on, and that's a Stearman, and I worked on a lot of Boeing Stearmans. My shop overhauled many of them, and they're a cool plane. Let's see, radial engines. Crankcase is mounted to the to the airframe, and the propeller rotates on the crankshaft the way God intended it to happen. Obviously, we have single and double rows. We talked about that. A single row will have odd or even number of cylinders. Odd, and a double row then would have even. All right, so let's see. Pros. They are sturdy, ish. They're getting older. And if you actually read the time between overhaul, I think for this engine here, it's like something like 500 hours because they were military engines. Oh, by the way, they built a lot of these for tanks. This is a tank engine. They just put a different crankshaft on it. And there was some different stud arrangements on the cylinders, but they were just drill it, put a stud in. It was an aircraft. So parts for these engines are still very plentiful, I believe, because so many tanks used them. You're getting tank parts, so do with that what you want to do. Sturdy, lowest weight to power ratio, so I guess we call it the best power to weight ratio. 220 horsepower, 450 horsepower out of this one. That'd be 985 cubic inch, 450 horsepower. This one is supercharged. This one has a supercharger, but it doesn't turn fast enough to supercharge. It's called a diffuser. And we'll get into that, I hope. Let's see. Good cooling because every single cylinder is out front. Let's see. Common radials. I just went over that. Ooh, do I have a picture? Let me see.
Do those have
Yes.
just a single crank throw?
Uh-huh. Yep. I'll get into that when we get into cranks and stuff like that. Single throw. Largest radial ever built was the Pratt & Whitney R4360. That's 28 cylinders producing 3,500 horsepower out of 4,360 cubic inch. So it's got how many rows? Four rows? Did I already say that?
Yeah.
4 rows, 28 cylinders. And that would have went into, yes, this right here. The Boeing B-50. So that was the largest production engine, was the 4360. I believe the next picture is the largest ever slated to go in production, but turbines came out right as they finished it. And I was right. The Lycoming XR7755. Guess how many cubic inches that thing was? 7,755. Wait, I think I got some stats on that. 7,750 cubic inch displacement, had 36 cylinders. That's 4 rows of 9. It almost looks like they're in line to me, though. Which means, I don't know, it might have been water cooled. I don't know. Horsepower. How much horsepower do you think?
200.
Huh? 210 horsepower. No. 7,000 horsepower. It's 10 feet long and only 5 feet in diameter, which is surprising. That's only that much in diameter. So it's not that big around. This is what I was looking for. It weighed 6,050 pounds. It burned 580 gallons per hour. That is 9.67 gallons every minute. 500.
Startup cost alone.
I know.
You'd have to refill that in the air.
Yeah.
But by the time you get into the runway, you're refueling.
My airplane holds enough fuel to operate that engine for 8 minutes. But then again, at 7,000 horsepower, at 8 minutes, shoot, I'd be home. I'd be wherever I want to be.
I don't think your plane could take off.
I don't think so either. We'd have to put a lot of weight in the tail.
What's the wing loading?
Yeah.
Too much.
So radial engines have a single throw with kind of an elliptical operation that goes on there. We'll get more into that as we go. We're going to skip that. All right, let's talk about horizontally opposed engines, where the bulk of our existence is in aviation, unless you're working on old aircraft. So let's see. We're going on tab. So like I said, I didn't make a lot of notes there, but I think you'll be fine. You can go to the gift shop and buy the tape if you want to. All right, so let's talk about horizontally opposed. Horizontally opposed, most common in aviation. We'll go back here. Most common in aviation. Pros, well, they're dependable. I would agree with that. They are dependable, very good power to weight ratio. They're economical, and I wrote relative terms. I don't know. Economical meaning they're cheaper than a jet engine, I guess. I don't know. They have a very low profile, as you guys can see. Yeah, even by the time you add the sump on, you're only talking about an engine that's about that tall. That's pretty good. They're obviously wider. Let's see. A low profile, reasonably free from vibration. That is true, especially these big 6 cylinders that have counterweighted propellers. Counterweighted crankshafts. Most of my life has been spent flying small Continentals, 85 horsepower, 0200s. And I had never really, I'd flown as a passenger, mechanic in a lot of 6-cylinder engines, big engines, but never as a pilot. And it was the first time I'd ever really piloted. First time I'd ever piloted a big bore 6-cylinder engine was when I bought my plane, and I already owned it, and it was the first takeoff. And I remember pulling the power. First of all, I had the power to it. And I'm like, holy crap, this thing actually freaking moves. And all things are relative. I'm used to, no 200. And then I remember making the first power reduction. I thought I killed the damn thing. I could hear it, but I could no longer feel it. I'm like, what the hell? I'm used to, my instrument panel shaking like crazy. So after a while, I got used to it. I'm like, okay, it vibrates and it makes noise. Obviously, the rear cylinder is going to run a little bit hotter. Yeah, they do. I think the center ones run a little bit hotter too. So just anytime you get those put together. So, all right. Let's see. That is way out of what I want to talk about. All right. All right. So let's see. We have the horizontally opposed. Let's talk about, and I'm kind of skipping forward, but I have designations. So we got to speak the lingo, which I've been speaking, thinking, I probably haven't told about that one. So we're talking about horizontally opposed. Oops, this is really being redundant. I remember writing that. So I'm just going to skip through this. Obviously, so we talk about engines in general. Again, we can designate them by cylinder arrangement. What are my cylinder arrangements? V-type,
Straight.
inline, W, radial. Okay, we could refer to them by, by cooling. We don't really refer to them by cooling, but some of them are air cooled. Almost all of them are air cooled. There's a few out there that are water cooled, especially we get into the Allison V12s. I think are all water cooled. Radials are not water cooled; they're air cooled. They made a few opposed engines that were liquid cooled. The diesel, if you will, they're water cooled. But let's talk about prefix and designations of horizontally opposed, which is where I really wanted to go with this. So designations, we'll put this here, prefix. All right, so for example, you guys have an O290 Delta, right? And that's a common designator looking right there. So we're going to talk about the prefix, which is the first thing. And you can add all kinds of stuff on there. If you have an L, that means it turns left hand. Left hand rotation. Viewed from the back of the engine. Let's be specific. Normally we'd say pilot's view. But let's stop and think about outside we have two Skymasters. Skymaster, if you haven't noticed, has one engine facing the front and one turned around going backwards. So how do I reference that one from the pilot's point of view? When I'm looking forward or when I'm turning around? So it is very specific, or Continental is, because of that situation, that the direction of rotation is when viewed from the back of the engine. So looking forward, this engine is going to turn to the right. And if I turn around, this one's also going to turn to the right from my perspective, looking at the back of the engine. So left, we could have a T designator, which is turbocharged. Lycoming tends to use the turbo, just the T. Continental likes to use the TS, which is turbo supercharged. Now I got to tell you, gets real confusing with these designators, because we like to use the term turbocharge as a bolt-on item that takes exhaust gases across it and spins up, and it's all exhaust gas driven. And we like to use the word supercharged as something that bolts onto the engine where a belt turns it or a gear driven. But in horizontally opposed, it doesn't work that way. They'll say turbo supercharged. And they're really not referring, it's a turbo that supercharges the engine. It's just a turbo. So all of these are turbo. I am not aware of any manufacturer of horizontally opposed engines that ever bolted a supercharger on, belt-driven supercharger. They are out there, that is for sure, but they're not made by Continental, they're not made by Lycoming. They're aftermarket products. So when you see turbo or turbo supercharged, it's got a turbo. You could have a V. That means it is vertical installation. It means, so like your engine is obviously sitting vertical because you're working on it, but normally it would be sitting in an airplane like this, right? With the cylinders going this way and the crankshaft going this way. Well, some engines are made to go with the crankshaft going up for helicopters. Like Lycoming made the VO 435. I built several of those. And what they did, instead of having the sump where yours would be, it's actually literally at the bottom of the engine because the top is the crankshaft and the cylinders go this way and then there's a sump down there. V, we can have, let me see, B, or H. Now this is confusing. V, vertical installation for use in helicopters. Or we could have an H, which is a horizontal installation for a helicopter. In other words, it's installed normally like you would think, but it's designed for a helicopter because of the way the baffling goes on it and the cooling fan and all that stuff. To make things more confusing, we have A, which is an aerobatic engine. So this is an engine that was designed for aerobatic operation, extended inverted operation. Think about the engine that you're working on with the oil sump on the bottom. That's great. Go inverted, where does the oil go? All to the top of the crankcase, which is now the bottom, and where's the pickup for the oil? Well, it's spacing up like this, and the oil's up here, not one down here. So what are you going to suck? Air, and you're going to feed air to the bearings, and the engine's going to go. So an aerobatic engine, the true first aerobatic engine produced by Lycoming, had an oil sump on the bottom and an oil sump on the top. Never seen one. But under normal operations, it would suck from down here. You go inverted, all the oil would go to this other sump, and a valve with gravity would switch and say, okay, now suck out of this, and so it would suck this way and go up. So it's a very special crankcase. Like I said, they're rare. I've never even seen one. What's that?
You don't fly knife edge. They're both.
Oh yeah, they got nothing. All right, so then they decided, well, we got to do something better than that. Well, we need a different type of aerobatic engine. So what do we do? Well, we already used the A, so well, let's add an E to it and just call it an aerobatic engine. Well, what's an aerobatic engine? Well, it's an engine designed for aerobatics. Well, but instead of doing a sump on the top and a sump on the bottom, just use your normal case and just drill a little hole, and then I think I have a picture of it when we get into oil systems. But it uses actually it's the Christian Christian or Kristen, I forget which it is. But anyway, inverted oil system where they, again, use a ball check valve that's actually mounted to the firewall, a tank that's mounted to the firewall, and they have hoses at the top of the aircraft engine that would normally act as a breather hose. When you go inverted, it plugs up the breather hose. The breather hose then becomes the oil pickup tube and puts it into the thing. So, and then the crankshaft is going to be much, much thicker. The crankshafts are hollow going down the front, most of them, but this one's going to be not so much hollow. You got to still have it hollow, and the flange up front is going to be very, very beefy. So, so aerobatic engine. So let me see. We have the I for fuel injection. We could add a G for geared, which means that like your engine has a crankshaft that comes out and the prop mounts right to it. So the prop turns at the same speed as the engine because it is the engine and they're bolted together. So it's 1-to-1. But I would say a lot of engines, some engines, to increase the horsepower, you want to increase the RPM. But you can't increase the RPM of the propeller because the propeller will go supersonic at the tips. If you go supersonic with the propeller, you're going to set up vibrations and crack and break the propeller. So they spin the engine a lot faster, run it through a gearbox, and then run the propeller at a normal speed. Continental did it with the GO 300, Gitsu 520s and 550s. All of the diesel engines do it because the diesel engine turns way fast. Car engines that have been used to make airplane engines do it. So we run it geared. So that's gear reduction. To turn engine faster. And prop, I'll say at normal speed. And we've got the O going in line, which stands for ordinary. It should. Opposed. We have R for radial, if we like. Radial. So we have the R985 for Pratt & Whitney. All right, so I will put, there are exceptions. I'll do this, exceptions. Older engines use different designators. A lot different. Like the little Cubs, you know, the Piper Cub, little yellow Piper Cub. It had an A65. Well, what does A stand for? Well, it's just their Model A engine that had 65 horsepower. So that was just the model and the horsepower. And then they came out with the Cessna 140s. Cessna 140s came out of the factory with the C85. Well, it's a Model C. And that was 85 horsepower. And then when they produced the Bonanza, up until when they were going to build the V-tail Bonanza, up until that point, Beechcraft's best-selling airplane, or the airplane that they were selling, was the Staggerwing Beech. You guys familiar with that? And it's a wooden fabric aircraft. Oh, they're worth millions now. It's a biplane, had the wings were not like this, they were staggered. One was up front, one was in the back. And beautiful airplanes. Very rare and expensive now, but that was what they were producing and had the radial engine on it. So they said, well, we got to mass produce something for all the guys coming home from the war who want an airplane. So they created the Bonanza and then had to go out and get an engine. Well, Lycoming had an engine that they wanted, but Lycoming said, we can't get the engine out in time, so they went to Continental and Lycoming each put in a bid. Lycoming used a 4-cylinder geared engine, which Beech wanted, but Lycoming said they couldn't meet production times. Continental made an engine, and they called it the E185, and said we can meet your production time. So Continental got the award, and that was the first 6-cylinder opposed engine ever made. So it's a Model E that made 185 horsepower. We look at the old radial engines, like the Continental. I said you had the W670. Oh, that's, I don't know what the hell the W stood for. It's just that was what they called it. The Lycoming had the, did have the R680. R stood for R, radial, so I guess that would not be an exception. But anyway, that's the old designators. So now we have the new designators, which we just covered. And then the second part, so going back to our regular one, the second part. The second part is cubic inch. That's the nearest cubic inch. There, cubic inch displacement, cubic inch. To nearest 10. They're kind of changing that now because they're getting, like they have the Lycoming 541. It's like, well, it's a 540, but it's a little different. Let's call it 541. So, like you have the 290, so that would be how many cubic inch displacement? 290 cubic inch. The old ones, it was horsepower. Now we all do cubic inch. So I think the smallest Continental now is the O200, which would be 200 cubic inch. O for opposed. Now they have a whole bunch of weird ones in there. Another common one is the IO360, which means that it is fuel injected opposed. That goes on the Skymaster. They also made the TSIO 360 because that's Continental, which means it's turbo supercharged. All of the Cessna 182s got 0470s. They also make the IO 470 now. You get into your cabin class airplanes, your 400 series Cessnas. They have Gitsus, which is a GTSIO. Geared, turbo supercharged, fuel injected opposed, 520s or 550s. The 550 is the biggest engine, Lycoming, or Continental makes Continental.
What's in a Cessna 340? Do you know?
No. Our 310 has 470s on it. But most people prefer the 520 for something like that. Probably an IO 520. TSIO 520. Turbo, yeah. Anything that is pressurized, anything pressurized has to have a supercharger on it, a turbocharger on it. Lycoming, nowadays we've got the O235, your Cessna 152s, O290's out of production. Then you go to the 320, which is probably the most ubiquitous, and that's your Chevy 350 of the sky right there. They're damn good engines. Lots of them, easy to run. They also make an O360 or an IO360. That's probably one of my favorite engines right there because they put out 200 horsepower and 4 cylinders. Then you get into the big boys at 540 cubic inches where they top out, except for the 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder, which is 720. So they would do the TIO 540, which is turbo supercharged. I don't know if Lycoming makes a geared. They make some other stuff though, like the VO 435. What is that for?
Vertically opposed.
Yep. Robinsons, I think they have an HIO 360,
Yes.
Horizontal fuel injection.
a horizontally installed helicopter engine, fuel injected. All right. All right, then we have the suffix part. So the suffix, that's the end part. And that is always going to be additional information about the engine. It could have like the type of accessory case, how it's arranged, type of crankshaft, Sometimes the designator can even tell you what kind of magnetos it has. I actually wrote that. Type of TYP, type of magnetos. I mean, all different kinds of stuff. For example, Lycoming makes, I told you about they make a very popular one, was it the IO360 A1B6D? That's like the biggest mouthful of one that I know. Let me see, D, that's the dual mag right there. I think this right here talks about what type of counterweights it has on the crankshaft. It just, all different kinds of stuff. You have to have a chart to decode it. You can't just know this stuff. All right, time when you're caught up. All right, we good? All right. Let me see if I can find something here. Oh, come on. Let me see here. Let's stop this.